Ever wondered how your brain just, soaks up information? Like from books or movies?
Yeah.
What if I told you that some of the most advanced AI out there learns in a way that's, well, surprisingly similar?
It's a fascinating comparison, isn't it?
Definitely. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're really getting into those parallels between how we learn and how AI gets trained, especially when copyrighted stuff is involved.
Yeah, and we're drawing on insights from AI brain parallels and copyright to help us unpack all this.
So our mission today, really, is to give you a clearer picture of how learning works, fundamentally, in both humans and AI.
And then explore what that might mean for things like AI training data and copyright. It's complex, it's evolving fast, but hopefully we can offer a bit of a fresh perspective.
Okay, let's dive right in then. So the source material, it kicks off with this really core idea. AI, especially neural networks, wasn't just plucked out of thin air. It was actually inspired by the brain.
Right, the structure, the function, it's intentional mimicry in a way.
And from that starting point, it kind of poses a question. If we humans can learn from copyrighted things all the time without getting sued, maybe AI should operate similarly.
It's a provocative start. And it hinges on this biological inspiration. I mean, think about the brain scale. You've got, 86 billion neurons, approximately?
Yeah, incredible numbers, all connected through synapses.
Exactly. And learning for us is basically those connections changing, getting stronger or weaker based on experience.
Right, like practice makes perfect, literally strengthening pathways. And the source says AI neural nets are analogous.
Very much so. They have these nodes, artificial neurons, you could say, and they're linked by connections, but these connections have different weights, importance, basically.
Okay, so not all connections are equal. Some matter more.
Precisely. And the AI learns by adjusting those weights, often using methods like backpropagation or gradient descent.
Which sounds technical, but it's basically the AI figuring out which connections are useful based on feedback.
That's a good way to put it. It mirrors how our synapses adapt. It's all about reinforcing useful links. This gets us to connectionist learning.
Connectionist learning. That's
It's this idea that things processed together get linked. Neurons that fire together wire together, as Hebb's rule famously puts it for brains.
Ah, right. I've heard that. So co-activation strengthens the link.
Exactly. And it's how we encode memories, recognize patterns. AI does something very similar. Backpropagation helps adjust weights, so nodes activated together get linked more strongly. It captures patterns in the data that way.
Makes total sense. Like learning associations. You see lightning, you expect thunder, the connection gets built.
Precisely. Now, this leads to another really cool idea, emergent representations.
Emergent representations. What does that mean in practice?
Well, think about how you don't have one specific neuron for cat and another for dog.
Right. That seems inefficient.
It would be. Instead, groups of neurons self-organize through experience to detect features, edges, shapes, textures, and combinations of these allow you to recognize the cat. It emerges from the network's activity.
So the brain figures out the building blocks itself without explicit instructions for cat.
Exactly. And deep learning AI, it does a very similar thing. You get these hierarchical feature detectors.
Hierarchical, meaning like layers.
Yeah, early layers might spot simple things like lines or colors. Deeper layers combine those to recognize more complex stuff, objects, faces, maybe even sentiment in text.
Wow. So the AI isn't just told, this is a cat. It learns to see the cat by building up from simple features.
That's the key insight. It figures things out. This emergence is a really fundamental parallel.
That is a bit of an aha moment.
Yeah.
It's not just data in, answer out. There's a learning process that mirrors ours. Now, the source also mentions errors. Both systems can kind of see patterns that aren't there.
Yes, and this shared flaw is quite telling, isn't it? Our brains are pattern matching machines, sometimes too good.
Like seeing faces in clouds. Pareidolia, is that it?
That's it. Or illusory correlations, thinking two unrelated things are linked just because they occurred together once or twice. Even conspiracy narratives often stem from this drive to find patterns, connecting dots that maybe shouldn't be connected.
We really want to make sense of things, even if we have to force the pattern sometimes. And AI does this too.
Absolutely. They talk about AI hallucination.
Not like dreaming.
No. Not dreaming. It means the AI generates outputs that sound plausible but are just wrong, factually incorrect, or nonsensical.
Why does that happen?
It's often because it's overgeneralized a pattern from its training data. It learned a rule or correlation that's usually true, but it applies it inappropriately. It's like pattern recognition gone slightly haywire.
Similar to our own cognitive biases then, in a way.
In a functional way, yes. So the big takeaway from this part is that both brains and AI build these internal models by strengthening connections based on things happening together. Associative learning.
And their successes and even some of their failures seem to stem from similar underlying principles.
Exactly. Okay, so we've established these really interesting similarities in the how of learning.
Right.
Now let's pivot to the what. What about learning from copyrighted material specifically?
Okay, so thinking about us humans first, we are constantly consuming copyrighted stuff, aren't we?
All the time. Books, music, articles, images online, movies, TV shows. Most of it is protected by copyright.
But we don't really think about it that way when we're just, reading or listening. We just absorb it.
We do. We freely consume these ideas, the language, the styles, the melodies. It all goes into our heads throughout our lives.
And it becomes part of our mental landscape, right? It influences how we think, how we talk, how we create things ourselves.
Precisely. The source calls this creative synthesis. We take all these absorbed bits and pieces, consciously or unconsciously, and we recombine them.
To write a new story, compose a song, paint a picture.
Exactly. We synthesize something new from the old influences. And crucially, the legal system is generally okay with this.
Yeah, nobody sues you because your novel was clearly influenced by Hemingway, or your song has a similar vibe to something you heard.
Right. There's a wide legal tolerance for human learning and creative influence. The law protects the specific expression of an idea, not the idea itself.
Or facts, or styles, generally.
Yeah.
And just having those ideas or influences bouncing around in your head isn't infringement. It's private thought, cognitive processing.
Exactly right. Now, contrast that with AI training. Developers feed AI models massive amounts of data, a lot of which is copyrighted text, code, images.
Okay, but is the AI just, memorizing it all?
That's the critical point. Generally, no, especially with large models. It's not about storing verbatim copies. It's about learning the patterns within that data.
So statistical patterns, right?
Yeah.
Like grammar rules, common word associations, typical visual compositions.
Yes, statistical regularities. The AI learns, for instance, that certain words often follow others, or that images described as cats tend to have these visual features. It builds a statistical model of the world as represented in the data.
So it's not storing the book. It's learning the rules of language from the book, among many other sources.
Correct. And it uses that learned model to generate new, statistically plausible outputs, things that follow the patterns it learned.
Which leads then to this argument for, what was the phrase? Philosophical and legal parity.
Yes. The argument is, if humans learn ideas and styles from copyrighted works without infringing, and AI learns statistical patterns and styles from copyrighted works without storing them verbatim, maybe those processes should be treated similarly by the law.
Because both are abstracting away from the specific expression.
Kind of. Humans abstract ideas, styles, facts. AI abstracts statistical patterns, relationships, features. Neither is ideally just copying the protected expression wholesale. It relates back to that idea-expression dichotomy.
The underlying concept versus the exact wording or image.
Exactly. And the argument extends to fair use, too.
How so?
Well, think about why fair use exists.
Yeah.
For things like education, criticism, research, commentary, parody.
Okay.
Human learning from copyrighted works clearly falls under purposes like education and research. It's generally considered fair use.
Right.
The argument is that training an AI, especially for generative purposes where it creates something new, is also a transformative use. It's using the works as data for the education of the AI.
So the AI isn't replacing the market for the original book or image. It's using it to learn how to create new things. That's the idea.
That's the core of that argument, yes. It's about enabling new creation based on learning from existing works, much like humans do.
Okay, this is really starting to crystallize.
Mm-hmm.
So pulling it all together, what's the main implication here? So what?
Well, the central thrust is this. Given that human brains and AI seem to learn in functionally similar ways through reinforcing connections based on experience and patterns, the case for treating their learning processes equivalently under copyright law gets stronger.
Meaning, it feels inconsistent to say humans can freely learn from copyrighted stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But an AI doing a fundamentally similar process of pattern extraction should be penalized.
Exactly. It highlights a potential logical inconsistency. If the process of learning is analogous, why should the legal treatment of that process differ so drastically?
So connecting it back to me, the listener,
Yeah.
just like I wouldn't get sued for writing a story inspired by a book I read,
Right.
the argument suggests AI developers shouldn't necessarily be penalized just for training an AI on data that allows it to produce novel creative outputs. Is that fair?
That's the essence of the argument presented in the source, yes. It boils down to a pretty simple logical flow if you accept the premises.
Okay, wait out for me.
Premise 1. Human brains and AI learn through analogous mechanisms, weighted connections, pattern reinforcement.
Okay, we covered that.
Premise 2. Humans are legally permitted to learn freely from copyrighted works without this internal learning process being considered infringement.
Right. Standard practice.
Conclusion. Therefore, AI should arguably have a similar freedom to learn from or be trained on such materials without the training process itself being deemed infringement.
That definitely gives you something to think about. It frames the whole debate in a really different way, focusing on the learning process itself.
It does. It shifts the focus from just the output to the underlying mechanism.
So, as a final thought then, if we take these deep parallels seriously, what might a future copyright framework even look like if it genuinely tried to account for the nature of learning, whether it's biological or artificial?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? It really pushes us to reconsider some fundamental assumptions in the age of AI.
So just to wrap up our deep dive today, we've looked at these really striking similarities, structurally and functionally, between how our brains learn and how AI learns.
The connectionist parallels, the emergent features, even the shared ways of making errors.
And we explored the argument that follows from this. Maybe AI training on copyrighted data deserves similar legal consideration to human learning, challenging some current assumptions about copyright.
Yeah, focusing on that idea of parity and fair use in the context of training data. Hopefully, this gave you, our listener, a fresh angle on this whole complex knot of AI, creativity, and copyright.
It's definitely not simple, and there are passionate arguments on all sides. This is just one perspective focusing on the learning process itself.
Absolutely. It's a conversation that's happening right now, legally, ethically.
So we definitely encourage you to keep thinking about these parallels, maybe dig into some of the ongoing debates yourself.
It's a space worth watching.
Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive.